Okay, so today I am really excited to be here because we are going to be talking about some recommendations that I have for you guys for fantasy books. A lot of you guys have been coming to me towards the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021 with my videos and asking me for recommendations, and I thought today let me do that. Let me give you guys some recommendations for beginners, intermediates, and advanced readers of fantasy, so everyone will be covered. We're going to start with the beginner section. This is for people who either haven't read fantasy, haven't read a lot, haven't read anything, through to those who have read some fantasy, through to those who have read a ton of fantasy. So I've got you covered. Let's get right into this. This is my fantasy recommendation video for beginners, intermediates, and advanced. Okay, so are you a beginner? Have you just started reading and realized, oh, I love fantasy? Or do you know someone who you want to get into reading or who you want to get into fantasy so you can talk about the same books? Beginners, I have you covered. Here is a list of a number of books that you can read if you're at the beginner level for fantasy. The first book is The Replacement by Brenna Yovanov. Now, this is basically a book that follows a boy whose name is Mackie, who, from what I can tell you about the first half of the book without giving it away, is that Mackie is basically allergic to everything, and by the end you find out why he's allergic to everything. I can't really say much else other than that because it will give a lot away. The reason why this is a beginner fantasy book, and it's the first book that I read for my booktube career, and I wish I knew this, but the reason why I call it a beginner fantasy is because to me, the first 3/4 of this book reads more like a contemporary than a fantasy. So there's only a little bit of fantasy that occurs right at the end of the book. And in fact, I do feel that the first 100 pages could have been cut from this book as far as for those who absolutely love fantasy, who are advanced fantasy readers. But for beginners, this is a great way to dip your toe into the fantasy world because you're starting off with what feels like a contemporary, and then you get to a point where there are fantastical elements towards the end. My next recommendation for beginners would be Personal Demons. The only thing that I will say about this as a warning for beginners is this is a dual perspective book. So if you have not read dual perspective, then please keep in mind before you pick up this one is that we are following two characters who in alternate chapters we get their perspective. So we're following Franny Kavanagh, who is a human. Franny Kavanagh is apparently going to be very integral in a pending battle that's going to occur between heaven and hell. So, God sends down a representative named Gabe, and hell sends up a representative named Luke, both of them trying to tag her for their respective places. So, aside from it being a dual perspective, and that is something for beginners to keep in mind, because that is a different writing style if you haven't come across that before, the reason why I'm recommending this as a beginner book is because it's the same deal as with The Replacement. This book kind of reads like a contemporary for quite some time, and then we get into the magical fantasy elements when we get towards the end. Now, in saying that, as I said, God sends down a representative, hell sends up a representative. So you have that fantastical element right off the bat with meeting I guess a demon and an angel, but aside from that, it kind of reads like a contemporary until we get towards the end. The next beginner I would recommend is Evermore. This is a lot of fun. So this book revolves around a girl whose name is Eva, who has the magical abilities of a psychic, but she doesn't want to be one. And what makes this book a beginner book in my eyes is that this book does not revolve around a character who has had these abilities for many, many, many years, and they're just so used to it, and we're just being dropped into the middle. Eva doesn't know really what's going on. She has an idea of what might be going on, but her hand is held through most of the process, and she is rejecting a lot of what is happening to her as well. So that, to me, makes it a more of a beginner fantasy. Highly recommend this one, especially if you like books that have more of a gothic tone to them. You'll love this. Next, Harry Potter. So I'm talking about the whole series here, which might make it intermediate because it is quite a commitment, but to look at it as more a beginner's type world to invest your time in, let's just say taking it one book at a time, it's a beginner book. So Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is actually a middle grade book. So this is targeted to audience aged between 7 to 12, and it definitely does read that way. J.K. Rowling has very easy to read writing style, and again, your hand is held throughout the entire process of this book. We have a boy who learns that he is a wizard. He lived his life thinking he was a human. One day he finds out he's a wizard, so he goes to a school for magic. This is not a spoiler, it happens very early on in the book. But your hand is held the whole time because our main character, our protagonist, who we see things through their perspective, knows nothing of the magical world. So we get to learn alongside him as he takes his first steps into this world. My final recommendation is one that's going to surprise a lot of people who are into the Cosmere universe and who have read a number of Cosmere books written by Brandon Sanderson. But I'm actually going to recommend... Oh, I've actually got one more after this too. But I'm actually going to recommend Mistborn Era 2 for beginners. Now, I do need to make a bold statement here. When I say Mistborn Era 2, I mean The Alloy of Law, Shadows of Self, and the first half of the Bands of Mourning. The reason why I'm saying the first half of the Bands of Mourning is because the second half kind of gives spoilers to Mistborn Era 1. Now, for those of you who have not read Mistborn at all, and who are questioning me, why would I recommend that you read Mistborn Era 2 when you haven't read Mistborn Era 1 as a beginner, is because there's a massive time jump between Mistborn Era 1 and Mistborn Era 2, and to me they are completely different. Mistborn Era 2 more revolves around a man who's kind of more like a detective, kind of like Sherlock and Holmes meets a magical world, if that makes sense. So while there is fantasy here, it's more predominantly about a detective and his sidekick, and so I just feel that there's a lot less magic in Mistborn Era 2 compared to Mistborn Era 1, which makes it a lot easier for a beginner to read. But again, big warning with Bands of Mourning, first half. Then go on and read Mistborn... Actually, you know what? Read Alloy of Law, then read Shadows of Self. Then, if you love these, then go on and read Mistborn Era 1, and then read Bands of Mourning. And the final book I'm going to recommend for beginners will be The Siren by Kiera Cass. This is a standalone book, and the magic system revolves around girls who are sirens who are trying to lure men to their death by luring them to the sea where they unconsciously drown themselves. And that's it. That is the magic system. So this also very much reads like a contemporary, where our protagonist has certain limitations, which makes it a struggle for her to talk to humans, but it does read a lot like a contemporary, so I would also recommend this as a beginner book as well. Okay, my lovely intermediates, it's your turn. So you've dipped your toe into fantasy and you've realised, hey, you know what? This is the genre for me, but I want to read something just a little more advanced. I've got you covered. First up, Vampire Academy. Okay, the reason why I'm putting this as an intermediate, because a lot of people will argue me on this and say it's beginner, but the reason why I'm putting this as intermediate is because to really fully appreciate Vampire Academy, in my opinion, you need to read the entire series, which is a 6-book series. Okay? So, for me, my journey with Vampire Academy was incredibly up and down. Book 1, 3 stars. Book 2, 3 stars. Book 3, 5 stars. Book 4, 3 stars, but it could have been 2. Book 5, 5 stars. And Book 6, 5 stars. So, the first 2 books received one of my lowest ratings that I've given for the series, because I found the first 3 quarters to be meandering for both the first and the second, but the third one was incredibly good for me, and the way it ended, books 5 and 6 were incredibly amazing. So it's more intermediate because you need to keep at the series to fully appreciate it, and you can't just put it down after book 1 or book 2. You really need to read all 6 books to appreciate everything about this world. So Vampire Academy is it's a paranormal book, but I'm going to include it in fantasy because it's not your everyday typical book, series. Okay. So Vampire Academy revolves around Dampier called Rose. I say it that way because either Dampier, Dampire, or Damper, depending on who you talk to. So, Dampir, named Rose, and that word basically refers to a half vampire, half human, who is at a school called Vampire Academy, who is trained to become a guardian, as are all Dampiers. Then we also have at the school Morois, who are the royal versions of vampires. They are the purebloods. There's no half-halfing it with Morois at all. And the school has a motto that they drill into their Dampiers, which is, as far as the Morois are concerned, they come first. So the Dampiers are there to learn to become guardians to guard the Moroi. The Moroi are there to advance their studies, and they're treated very differently. This is a very, very interesting world. There's a lot of different things that go on in this world. We learn a lot about vampire culture for this world because every vampire book is completely different, Stephanie Meyer. And sparkling vampires. But anyway, moving on. The next series that I'm going to recommend for intermediates, because you're intermediate now, so you can handle series, is my favorite series of all time, Mistborn Era 1. So I spoke earlier about Mistborn Era 2 and how I said read the first two books and then go on and read Mistborn Era 1. Well, by the time you get to the end of the second book in Mistborn Era 2, you might as well consider yourself an intermediate. So then you jump onto arguably my favorite book of all time, Mistborn The Final Empire, then The Well of Ascension, Book 2, and then The Hero of Ages, Book number 3. I consider this to be much more advanced because of the fact that magic is actually at the forefront of this book and the series as a whole. Yes, there are other things that occur, such as there are some political things that occur, and there's an argument that it's a dystopian world that we're dealing with, especially in this book. But magic is certainly at the front and center. If not for the magic, half the things that happen with our characters wouldn't have happened. So you're really diving into a world of magic where magic is at the forefront. So if you love magic, then jump right in. But I just don't recommend it to a beginner because for beginners, they don't really know if they love fantasy or not. So here's a little taste here, a little taste there. Mistborn Era 1 is all about the magic. So, yeah, highly recommend. And the final book that I'm going to recommend for my lovely intermediates is Warbreaker. So this is a standalone, and some people might recommend this for beginners because it is a standalone, but I don't, because it is hella long and it is a little more complex than the ones I recommended to you guys in for beginners with Mistborn Era 2. It is dual perspective. We are following two different characters, and one of them, their journey can be a little bit complicated, at least to start with. It can be a little bit tough for you to get your bearings with this one. Now, don't allow that to throw you off. It's not an advanced book. It's an intermediate book. So it just takes a moment. So allow yourself to get through chapter 2 or chapter 3 before you say, You know what I mean? So you're going to be dropped into a world. Be prepared for that. There's no hand-holding here. You're going to be dropped into a world. And an amazing story continues from here. Also, part of the reason why this is intermediate is because the magic system is not as well fleshed out. It is there. Certainly, it is a prominent feature in the book, but it's not as well fleshed out as, say, Mistborn The Final Empire, where you are handheld with this one, where with this one, not as much. Alright, my advanced readers, I have not forgotten about you. If you are someone who loves fantasy, but you want to be tested, because seriously, these authors, they're writing books and they're just not testing you. They're not pushing the limits. It's same old, and you want to get out of that comfort zone. I have got you covered, my dears. Don't you worry about that. I have got you covered. The first book that I'm going to recommend to my advanced readers is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. If you have not read fantasy before, do not pick up this book. Not because it's a bad book. I think overall it is a good book, but this book takes a long time to get into, to understand. If you are the type of reader who doesn't care, and if you're just dropped into the middle of something, you honestly don't care, you're fine to just read whatever, and yeah, it's fine, I'm reading and whatever, then pick it up. But if you're someone who really cares about what you're reading and you want to get invested in your characters and things like that, this book will test you. Environmentally, this is an amazing book. It's set in, I believe it's India. Don't quote me. I think it's India. And we are dealing with a woman who is a half jinn and another character is a jinn and a prince. It is dual perspective. Jinn is the term they use in here to refer to genies. Which sounds fun, but it's no Aladdin Picnic. This is not an easy to understand book. In fact, it took me till 3/4 of the way through to finally get what the heck was going on. It is extremely slow paced. Now, our character, who is a half jinn, doesn't know this at the beginning of the book, but she finds it out very quickly. But from there on, her perspective is extremely slow. And I spent a lot of this book thinking, what is the purpose of her? Why are we following her? Why is she a perspective? Yeah, but once you get to the end of the book, you can really look back and appreciate everything. So it is one of those advanced books that requires a ton of patience, but also requires a ton of focus, because there are so many little details that you pick up along the way that you appreciate when you get to the end. That's what makes this book an advanced book. I am not in a hurry to reread this book because of how advanced I found it. If you disagree, let me know in the comments below, but I recommend this if you're an advanced fantasy reader. Pick up The City of Brass, and at the very least, you'll appreciate the cultural aspects of it being set in, I think it's in India. I think. Don't quote me. Alright, the next advanced book that I'm going to recommend is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This book has been all the rage in recent times, as has book 2, The Fires of Vengeance. Evan Winter is an extremely good writer, but the reason why I'm going to call this an advanced book to read is because for me, I found this the writing style of Evan Winter to be tough for me to read. The reason for this is because Evan Winter, while he was born in the UK, he was raised in Africa, and the language spoken in some regions of Africa is Afrikaans. There is a lot of Afrikaan terminology in this book. Now, there is a glossary at the back that tells you what everything means, but if you're like me and you're reading a book, you don't want to have to always jump to the back to find out what a word means, and that just really grated on me. Also, this is a book that I would say is going to be appreciated more by those who love fantasy, not necessarily for a magic system. They like fantasy because it's things that are out of the ordinary that don't necessarily have to do with magic. We are following Tao, who wants to enact revenge because something has happened in chapter 1 that I won't talk about, that drives him forward. And it's kind of like, if you love the Hunger Games, it's kind of like the Hunger Games with swords. So let's get on to that final recommendation for my wonderful advanced readers. You want something advanced. You want to experience something that is advanced in every single way. Writing style, plot, characters, a duology not enough for you? How about a multi-perspective? Staying in one area not enough for you? How about a massive landscape? 500 pages not enough for you? How about 1,000 pages for every single book in the series? If you haven't worked it out by now, that's totally fine. But if you're an advanced reader and you want all those things, I know exactly where to turn you. I'm turning you towards the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. And yes, what I said a moment ago is very true. Every single book in the Stormlight Archives is over 1,000 pages long. We start off with The Way of Kings. Then we move on to Words of Radiance, and then we move on to Oathbringer. And every single book adds at least 100 pages to it, so 1,000 pages, 1,100 pages, 1,200 pages. I have not read Rhythm of War yet. I've discussed that already on this channel, so you can go and check out my Why I Love Graphic Audio video for more about why I haven't read Rhythm of War as yet. But yeah, this is a commitment, is reason one why it's an advanced book, because with 1,000 pages, even the most advanced of readers, it's not going to happen overnight. And if it does, anyone who claims to have read The Way of Kings in one night, can you do it again and can I watch? Because I don't know anyone who's been able to read this in one night. It took me a week to get through each one. So, and that's me being dedicated and allotting like 6 hours every day to reading. So, you know, it takes a while. The scope of each book is extremely broad in that it's an epic, they're called an epic fantasy because if you want to look at the geography of the world we're dealing with, it is a massive landmass that we are dealing with. We're also dealing with a magic system that we don't quite know in the first book. We know that it's there. We're hearing little snippets here and there, but we don't quite really get to understand the magic system until book number 2. So if you're a fan of magic systems, progress to book number 2 and you'll learn more there. This is my equal first favorite book for 2020, alongside Mistborn: The Final Empire, the first book for Mistborn Era 1. But yeah, very, very advanced and multi-perspective. Yeah, so we're not just following the perspective of one character. Brandon Sanderson, in my opinion, I wouldn't necessarily call this multi-perspective, but a lot of people do. What I call this is we have an author who is an omniscient narrator who is able to go inside the minds of everyone at any given time, and we are following at least 6 different characters depending upon what book you are reading. And we also have interludes. So there's let's say you're reading this book and let's say there's 4 parts. So we have part 1 and that goes on for, I don't know, let's say 250 pages. Then you have about 4 chapters of interludes, little side stories that have nothing to do with our main characters, but they're little gems here and there for you to have a little breather, because trust me, you're going to need a little breather by that point. And then once you get through those interludes, back into it we go until we get to the end of part 2, and then we'll have another interlude where we have 3 or 4 chapters to allow you to have a little bit of a breather. It is very, very epic, but also Words of Radiance is extremely rewarding. They all are in their own way, but there you go. Advanced readers, if you have not read the Stormlight Archives, put that on your New Year's resolution. I want to get through the Stormlight Archives by the end of 2021. And trust me, if you are an advanced reader who is looking for more in your fantasy books, Stormlight Archives is absolutely the way to go. You will not be disappointed. But that is it. That is where I'm going to leave it. Whether you are a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, or if you have a friend that is a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, here at Mr. Francy Reads, we have you covered. Do you have any other genres that you'd like for me to look into for beginners, intermediates, and advanced? Let me know in the comment section below. But in the meantime, that is where we are going to leave it, letting you guys go peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah. Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading!